Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honor to rise this evening and speak on Bill C11. Now, there's no question that Canada's Copyright Act is in dire need of an overhaul to reflect and to serve the needs and the realities of artists, creators, rights holders, and consumers in the 21st century. However, on too many counts, Bill C11 fails to meet the task at hand, and for every problem that it attempts to fix, new problems are created. We in the NDP and Canadians across the country have serious concerns about the bill in its present state, and we look forward to working constructively with the government to amend elements of the bill to address concerns that Canadian stakeholders have. Now, as we know, this bill was introduced in the last Parliament exactly in the state it appears before us today. And now this is not the first time the government has done this in the 41st Parliament. Indeed, since the election in May, they've introduced several bills that have been virtually word for word the same as bills that they put forward in previous parliaments. Now, it's a bit early in the mandate of a government to show inertia, but from the recycling of bills, the omnibus crime bill, the ending of the long gun registry, recycling C-11, this is a government that has begun to run out of ideas already. And by limiting debate in railroading committees, they've shown that they don't have any ideas themselves, and they're sure not interested in the ideas of Canadians that want to speak to this bill. Notwithstanding the fact that the Legislative Committee looking into Bill C-32, as it was called in the 40th Parliament, met with over 100 witnesses who all spoke about the many serious problems that exist in the legislation has not changed. What's more, we hear that the government is not interested in any more input from Canadians on the substance of the bill. Now, that's too bad. The government's missing an important and historic opportunity to craft a made-in-Canada Copyright Act that will stimulate innovation in digital industries and that will truly protect artists, other content creators, and rights holders while at the same time balancing the needs of consumers. And while they don't seem interested any longer in what Canadians have to say about copyright, they certainly care about the big boys in Hollywood and New York who want Canada to toe the line, and a deeply flawed line it is, that creative industries and consumers toe south of the border. The government's anti-circumvention position as it pertains to technological prevention measures, TPMs or digital locks, is a case in point. Now, I understand that if someone is making available thousands upon thousands of songs or movies or pieces of software and is profiting from this activity, then that person is clearly infringing on copyright for commercial purposes. Pirated DVDs sold on street markets are another example of this activity. Someone is making money off the blood, sweat, and tears and creativity of artists and entrepreneurs, but the creators are not getting paid. Now, certainly when someone is in that kind of business, another example is the making of semiconductors specifically to allow gamers to hack their gaming platforms to play pirated software. Okay, that goes beyond the regular practices of consumers to share and enjoy content. But much of the scaremongering from major record labels and film studios have unfortunately tried to conflate the practices I've just described as the common practices of music fans and movie fans, which has led to the bizarre circumstances which we all know about, grandmothers getting sued for downloading some tunes on the internet. Conservatives could have crafted a Canadian-made solution to this very complex set of circumstances. Instead, they caved to their U.S. buddies again. Now, on the one hand, C-11 finally recognizes common consumer practices, time shifting, recording TV for later viewing, format shifting. The bill also adds parody and satire and education as fair dealing exceptions, which should be for the benefit of consumers and creators. But on the other hand, all of this is moot if there is a digital lock on the content, since that measure and the anti-circumvention measure that's attached to it supersedes all else. So what Canadian consumers win with one hand, they lose with the other. If there's a digital lock on a CD, you won't be able to make a backup copy. If there's a digital lock on an e-book, you can't change its format for use on a different type of e-reader. If there's a digital lock on a DVD, journalists won't be able to use part of it under their fair dealing rights. It doesn't make sense that digital locks could supersede other rights that are guaranteed in the very same piece of legislation. What's worse is that not only do digital locks prevent Canadians from fully enjoying materials that they have legally purchased, They're also backed by incredibly unreasonable punitive damages, fines of up to $1 million and 5 years in jail for doing something that, if it were not for the presence of the digital lock, would be entirely acceptable. It's beyond logic. And while we have the issue, while we in the NDP have an issue with the practice of suing fans, suing consumers, I would like to also point out, to mention that it's really only the very large multinational media outlets who could avail themselves of this kind of protection anyway. For example, members of the Canadian Independent Music Association, who together, as a bloc, represent 24% of all music sales in Canada, larger than EMI and Warner Music sales combined and greater than Sony Music sales. This organization is made up of Canadian-owned companies, mostly small and medium-sized businesses, which include record producers, labels, publishers, recording studios, managers, agents, and so on. In other words, the heart and soul and bones of the English language Canadian music business. Now, few, if any, of the member organizations could pursue those who under C-11 infringe copyright through the courts. It would be cost prohibitive for them. So while executives at the big multinationals slap themselves on the back at how compliant this government has been with C-11, this bill doesn't really help the independent music industry. It doesn't help the small businesses. It doesn't help the small entrepreneurs. And there is no question that the music industry has gone through a very difficult time over the last 15 years. So it is all the more pressing that we craft copyright legislation that addresses the profound need to invest in new business models and innovation in the Canadian cultural industries. But instead, C-11 takes tens of millions of dollars out of the hands of artists annually by waiving the so-called broadcast mechanical tariff and by playing politics with the blank copying levy. Mr. Speaker, prior to my election to this place in May 2011, I derived my primary income in the arts and culture sector as a musician, a songwriter, a producer, a composer, and a journalist. And I can tell this House that this is a very difficult way to make a living and raise a family, and that most in this profession work terribly long hours for many years, and most barely earn a dollar. But having been lucky enough to make my living in the arts, I can tell you, to paraphrase, it's potentially a good way to get rich, but a lousy way to make a living. With the arrival of the digital era, many believe that this would herald a new day for artists. The dawning of a middle class where it wasn't always feast or famine, where new revenue streams and business models would raise the average income for Canadian artists from below the poverty line to something resembling a decent living. I mean, that is what we should be striving for, always. And I think it's fair to say that that dream has largely gone unfulfilled. Writers still make more money slinging burgers than they do on their work. And the average annual income of Canadian artists, Mr. Speaker, is under $13,000. So I think it is important to remember that the spokespeople for the multinational music and movie business are not speaking for artists. They are speaking for their shareholders. Prior to the digital revolution, prior to Napster, I know I'm running out of time, Mr. Speaker, prior to BitTorrent sites and Netflix, artists were still struggling. Not a lot has actually changed for artists. So let's be clear, artists have always done most of the work and received the smallest share of the return. It was the same before the digital revolution, and it is the same now. And that's too bad, Mr. Speaker. Bill C11 only makes the situation worse. We know that Canadians support the arts and are willing to pay for it, but this bill wipes out $20 million in annual revenue that goes directly to artists and rights holders by eliminating the broadcast mechanical tariff. Surely, in the hundreds of witness testimonies on Bill C-32, the government heard that this would be detrimental to artists and rights holders. But again, this government is very in touch with business interests of private broadcasters and big Hollywood film studios, but out of touch with Canadian artists and the audience, the Canadian public, who supports them. Mr. Speaker, C-11 could have set a new, innovative, and exciting course for Canada's cultural industries and workers, the artists who create its content, as well as Canadian consumers. In its current state, Bill C11 falls far short of moving Canada forward into the 21st century, but we look forward to working with the government on constructive amendments to fix this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, as we've heard through the summer, I've been having a lot of meetings with a lot of different groups with respect to this bill, and what I've heard consistently is how important the sector is to the Canadian economy. You know, it's a $40 billion industry. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are created or supported through this industry. The honourable member talked earlier in his discussions about debate, when he knows that this is something that's been before the House for many, many years. It's heard hundreds of witnesses, thousands of hours of testimony. A lot of members of Parliament have been hearing the exact same things. He talks about the technical protection measures. In our neck of the woods, those who create video games, it's extraordinarily important for them, for that industry, that there are technical protection measures that would support and protect that industry. Does he not support that? Does he look at other jurisdictions where the similar things as we've put in place in Bill C11 have actually not limited the public's access to quality digital content? It's actually improved it. And is the only solution that the NDP actually have is to continue to tax Canadians? Does he actually think that the only way to support Canadian artists is to punish the artists and to punish Canadians, and that a $40 billion industry is somehow going to collapse under the threat, as he would project it, of a $20 million levy that he suggests will no longer exist?
Member for Davenport.
I'm a little surprised that the honourable member opposite would just wave his hand at $20 million. $20 million. For a sector where the average annual income is under $13,000, I think the honourable member owes artists across Canada an apology.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Bonavista, Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor.
Yeah, I actually agree with my honourable colleague from the NDP, and not only that, I would add that they didn't seem to flinch when it come to the money that was potentially lost from the auto sector, certainly. There seems like there was very little debate there. I would like to point out, though, to the Parliamentary Secretary, he talked about the TPM measures and talked about, you know, this model that's out there to protect all of them. Actually, I'll give him several examples, including Australia, the United States, which looked at ways of circumventing TPMs for the reasons of education. As a matter of fact, they went fully into using TPMs and digital locks, but backed away on several measures simply because it was too strong. And therefore, some exemptions were made. I would humbly suggest that using something like the three-step process by which you can judge TPMs as a way of circumventing them for instances such as education. That would be one of the measures. But certainly, he speaks truth to this matter by saying that it's just an all-or-not measure that simply should be looked at once again and in committee. Thank you.
For Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his comments. Mr. Speaker, there's no question that this is a very complex bill. It's very difficult to balance all of the interests of all the stakeholders, but it does Canadians no service to listen to this overheated rhetoric around taxing Canadians and taxing artists and hurting artists and punishing artists. You know, Canadians want to see some constructive debate, and that's what we're proposing. We'd like to see that in committee.
For another short question, the honourable member for Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We heard the Minister for Heritage get up a few minutes ago and make a statement that anyone that doesn't agree with him doesn't understand technology. But I, of course, would like to comment that, first off, you know, people that are pirating movies are burning them onto DVDs. And people that are downloading songs are putting them onto iPods. So what is it that the minister doesn't understand? But for my honourable colleague, you know, you were talking about $13,000 average income and making a decent living. What kind of missed opportunities does my colleague think there are happening with this bill?
The honourable member for Davenport.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for that question. One of the great examples of innovation and a business model that works spectacularly is the collection of performance royalties by SOCAN, and songs are licensed You, as a writer, you become a member, and the organization collects that license and disperses it to its members. It's worked for years and years, and it's a cornerstone of many artists' annual income. It's a very effective tool, and that's one example that we would have liked to have seen the government look at, ways in which we could license content and recoup it in a different way.
Resuming debate.